Nobody at the gala dinner knew they were witnessing the biggest mistake of their lives. The ballroom glittered with luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, champagne flowed endlessly, and the city's elite filled the room with laughter and applause. At a table near the center of the hall sat Sophia, heavily pregnant and struggling to hold back tears. To everyone around her, she looked like a woman who had reached the end of her marriage. What nobody knew, not her husband, not his family, not even most of the guests, was that Sophia secretly owned a multi-billion-dollar company. A business empire worth more than the combined fortunes of many people in that room. Completely unaware of the truth, her husband, Ethan, picked up a pen and signed the divorce papers. A satisfied smile spread across his face as he pushed the documents toward her. For him, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a celebration. The moment the signatures were complete, he proudly wrapped an arm around Sophia's best friend, the woman he intended to marry. Gasps swept through the ballroom. Then came applause. His parents were the first to stand. His mother laughed openly. His father raised a glass in approval. Soon, his entire family joined in, mocking the pregnant woman they believed had just lost everything. Some whispered cruel jokes. Others openly laughed at her humiliation. Sophia sat quietly through it all. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply watched. Because while they celebrated what they thought was their victory, they had no idea that a devastating truth was about to come crashing down on them. And before the night was over, the husband who divorced her, the best friend who betrayed her, and the family that laughed at her suffering would discover exactly who Sophia really was. What happened next shattered their world completely. The applause continued. Guests surrounded Ethan and Vanessa as though they were the stars of the evening. Champagne glasses rose into the air. Congratulations echoed from every direction. Sophia remained seated. The divorce papers lay on the table in front of her like a monument to broken promises. Across the ballroom, Ethan smiled wider than he had in months. Vanessa clung to his arm, proudly accepting the attention. The sight made Sophia's chest tighten. Not because she still wanted Ethan. That feeling had disappeared long ago. What hurt was the betrayal. Vanessa had once been the person she trusted most. The woman who knew her secrets. The woman who had attended her wedding. The woman who had held her hand when she announced her pregnancy. Now that same woman stood beside her husband as if she had won a prize. Ethan's mother suddenly lifted her glass. "To my son's future," she announced loudly. The room erupted with cheers. "And to finally leaving the past behind." Several relatives laughed. The meaning was obvious. Sophia was the past. Vanessa was the future. Sophia lowered her eyes. Years ago, comments like that would have shattered her. Tonight they barely registered. Because deep inside, she felt something unusual. Not anger. Not sadness. Certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when a storm is already moving toward shore and only one person can see it. At a nearby table, a few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Something about Sophia's silence felt strange. Most people would have reacted. Most people would have cried. Some would have thrown the papers back in Ethan's face. Sophia did none of those things. She simply watched, as though she were waiting for something. Or someone. The orchestra continued playing. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. The ballroom remained dazzling and elegant. Yet beyond the towering glass windows, dark clouds were gathering over the city. A faint flash of lightning illuminated the horizon. The storm remained far away. For now, Inside, Ethan accepted another round of congratulations. "You made the right choice," one businessman told him. "Absolutely," another agreed. Vanessa smiled proudly. Sophia noticed how desperately Ethan soaked in the approval. It reminded her of something her grandfather once said. A man who constantly seeks validation from others eventually becomes controlled by it. At the time, she hadn't understood the lesson. Now she did. Ethan had spent years chasing status, chasing appearances, chasing the approval of people who would abandon him the moment his fortune disappeared. And soon, that lesson would become painfully clear. Near the ballroom entrance, the hotel manager glanced toward the doors. His expression changed. 3 men in dark suits had just entered. They weren't guests. They carried themselves differently. Calm, professional, purposeful. One of them briefly scanned the room before his gaze settled on Sophia. Then he nodded. The movement was subtle, almost invisible, but it caused the manager's stomach to tighten. A strange feeling settled over him. The feeling that tonight's celebration was built on a misunderstanding so enormous that it would soon become impossible to ignore. Sophia noticed the men. For the first time all evening, a faint smile touched her lips. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough to acknowledge what was coming. Meanwhile, Ethan stood on a small stage near the center of the ballroom and raised his glass once more. "Tonight marks a new beginning," he announced. Cheers erupted again. Vanessa beamed. His family applauded. The room celebrated. But somewhere beyond the ballroom walls, events had already begun unfolding. Phone calls were being made. Instructions were being delivered. Decisions were being finalized. Like falling dominoes, one action after another had already been set into motion. The people laughing tonight believed they were witnessing Sophia's downfall. They had no idea they were actually standing at the beginning of their own. While the celebration continued inside the ballroom, Sophia found herself staring at the champagne glass in front of her. The golden liquid reflected the ballroom lights, creating tiny flashes that reminded her of another night years ago. A much happier night. A night when Ethan had proposed. Back then, she believed she had found the man she would spend the rest of her life with. He had been charming, ambitious, confident without being arrogant. At least that was how he appeared. Sophia remembered sitting beside him at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Neither of them had much money at the time. The table had been simple, the food inexpensive. Yet it remained one of the happiest evenings of her life. Ethan had spoken endlessly about his dreams. He wanted to build a successful company. He wanted to create a legacy. He wanted to prove himself. Sophia admired that determination. When he proposed, she never hesitated. Her answer came instantly. Yes. For years afterward, she believed it was the easiest decision she had ever made. The memory lingered for only a moment before another burst of laughter pulled her back to reality. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood surrounded by guests. Vanessa rested comfortably at his side. The sight felt surreal, almost unreal, as though she were watching strangers instead of 2 people who had once occupied the center of her world. The orchestra continued playing softly. Waiters moved between tables. Guests smiled and toasted to Ethan's future. Meanwhile, Sophia's mind drifted once again into the past. The early years of their marriage had not been easy. Ethan's business struggled constantly. There were months when failure seemed inevitable. Investors walked away. Projects collapsed. Opportunities disappeared. Every setback hit Ethan hard. He often returned home frustrated and exhausted. Many nights he doubted himself. Many nights he talked about quitting entirely. Each time, Sophia stood beside him. She listened, encouraged, supported. While others saw only Ethan's ambition, Sophia saw the fear hidden beneath it. She became his emotional anchor. When he lost confidence, she restored it. When he wanted to quit, she pushed him forward. When he failed, she helped him try again. The irony now felt almost cruel. Because the man she helped build was the same man celebrating her humiliation tonight. A sudden movement inside her stomach interrupted the thought. The baby shifted. Sophia instinctively rested her hand against her belly. The small movement brought comfort, strength, a reminder that her future no longer depended on Ethan. Across the ballroom, Vanessa laughed at something Ethan whispered. The sound triggered another memory. A memory Sophia had spent months trying to forget. The first time she noticed something unusual between them. At the time, it seemed insignificant. A glance. Nothing more. Just a brief exchange of eye contact during a dinner gathering. Yet something about it felt wrong. The look lasted only a second. Perhaps less. But intuition often notices what logic ignores. Sophia remembered brushing the feeling aside. Vanessa was her best friend. Ethan was her husband. Suspicion felt ridiculous. Impossible. She trusted them completely. Trust. The word now carried a bitterness it never once possessed. Weeks after that dinner, Ethan's behavior began changing. The changes were subtle at first. More business trips. More late meetings. More unexplained absences. Whenever Sophia asked questions, Ethan always had answers. Reasonable answers. Convincing answers. Answers designed to end conversations quickly. She believed him. Because that's what people do when they love someone. They believe. Even when doubt quietly knocks at the door. The ballroom lights shimmered overhead as Sophia remembered the day she learned she was pregnant. The joy had been overwhelming. For hours, she imagined Ethan's reaction. She imagined his excitement, his happiness, his pride. Instead, when she finally shared the news, his response felt strangely distant. He smiled, said all the right words. Yet something seemed absent. Something important. At the time, she blamed work stress. Now she understood. His heart had already begun drifting elsewhere. The realization hurt even months later. Not because she missed him. Because she missed the future she thought they would have. The future that never truly existed. Then came the night everything changed. The night illusions finally died. Sophia could still remember every detail. The house had been quiet. Ethan had fallen asleep in the living room after returning from another supposed business trip. His phone rested on the coffee table. For hours Sophia ignored it. She had no intention of invading his privacy. Then the screen lit up. One message. Then another. Then another. The sender's name made her stomach drop. Vanessa. Her best friend. Sophia stared at the screen. Frozen. Part of her wanted to look away. Part of her already knew exactly what she would find. Finally, with trembling hands, she opened the messages. The truth appeared instantly. There was no misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. No mistake. The affair was real. Every message confirmed it. Every conversation destroyed another piece of the life she believed she was living. Sophia remembered sitting alone in the darkness long after Ethan fell asleep. The pain was unbearable. Not because her husband had betrayed her. Because two people she loved had betrayed her together. The cruelty felt deliberate, personal, intimate. The wound cut deeper than ordinary heartbreak. Yet she never confronted them. Not immediately. Instead, she did something unexpected. She remained silent, patient, observant. Over the following months, she gathered evidence. Messages, emails, hotel bookings, photographs, financial transactions. The deeper she looked, the worse the betrayal became. What she discovered revealed not a mistake, not a temporary lapse in judgment, but a calculated deception that had been unfolding for a very long time. And as painful as the truth was, it gave her something valuable. Clarity. The clarity she needed to stop fighting for people who had already abandoned her. Back in the ballroom, Ethan lifted another glass. Guests applauded. Vanessa smiled triumphantly. His family continued celebrating. None of them realized that Sophia already knew every secret they thought remained hidden. None of them realized she had spent months preparing for this night. And none of them realized that while they were celebrating what they believed was a victory, they were moving closer and closer to a disaster that would change their lives forever. The first cracks had appeared long ago. Tonight, the entire foundation was about to collapse. The gala dinner had transformed into something far different from what had originally been planned. What was supposed to be a celebration of business achievements had become a public spectacle. A stage for humiliation. A stage for betrayal. And according to everyone in the ballroom, Sophia was the evening's unfortunate loser. The orchestra continued playing elegant music, while waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. Guests laughed. They mingled. They gossiped. And more often than not, the topic of conversation was Sophia. She remained seated alone at her table. The divorce papers still rested in front of her. Her calm demeanor only seemed to encourage people further. Many interpreted her silence as weakness. Others mistook it for defeat. None of them understood what it truly was. Control. Across the ballroom, Ethan's mother had become the center of attention. She seemed determined to make sure everyone knew exactly how she felt. "I always knew this marriage wouldn't last," she announced loudly. Several nearby guests nodded. "I tried to warn Ethan years ago." The statement was a lie. But that hardly mattered. People often rewrite history when they believe they are standing on the winning side. One of Ethan's aunts laughed. At least he finally came to his senses. Another relative added, "Vanessa is a much better match." Maury laughter followed. Sophia heard every word. The insults no longer surprised her. What surprised her was how comfortable they seemed saying such things publicly. Months ago, they had at least pretended to be polite. Tonight, they had completely abandoned the mask. At another table, Vanessa accepted compliments from several guests. She looked radiant beneath the ballroom lights. Confident. Victorious. The role suited her. Sophia watched as Vanessa gently touched the diamond necklace around her neck. Sophia immediately recognized it. Ethan had purchased it 3 months earlier. He claimed it was a gift for an important client. Another lie. Just one among hundreds. Vanessa noticed Sophia looking. A smug smile appeared on her face. She deliberately adjusted the necklace, ensuring it caught the light. The message was obvious. I won. The gesture might have hurt once. Now it only confirmed what Sophia already knew about her. A person who needs to display victory usually feels insecure about it. Across the room, Ethan continued accepting congratulations. The attention seemed almost intoxicating. Every compliment inflated his confidence. Every approving smile convinced him he had made the right decision. He never once questioned whether the people praising him tonight would remain loyal if circumstances changed. Sophia remembered a conversation she once had with her grandfather. She had been young, still learning how power worked. Never trust people who gather around success, he told her. Pay attention to who remains during failure. At the time, she hadn't understood. Now she did. Perfectly. A sudden burst of laughter erupted from a nearby table. One guest had apparently made a joke about divorce settlements. Several others joined in. The punchline centered around Sophia supposedly leaving with nothing. The group found it hilarious. Sophia simply looked away. Months earlier, such cruelty would have devastated her. But the woman sitting in that ballroom was no longer the same woman who first discovered Ethan's betrayal. Pain had changed her. Not into someone bitter. Into someone stronger. Her thoughts drifted back to the months she spent gathering evidence. Those months had been among the hardest of her life. Every new discovery revealed another lie. Another betrayal. Another secret. She remembered sitting alone in her study late at night, reviewing emails and financial records. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she became angry. Sometimes she simply stared at the evidence until sunrise. The hardest part wasn't discovering the affair. It was realizing how long it had been happening. How many opportunities Ethan and Vanessa had been given to tell the truth. How many times they deliberately chose deception instead. Eventually, the heartbreak faded. In its place came clarity. And clarity was far more powerful than anger. Back in the ballroom, a subtle shift began occurring. Most guests failed to notice it. Sophia did not. Neither did the hotel manager. Near the entrance, several unfamiliar individuals had begun arriving. Men and women dressed in expensive business attire. Not guests. Not socialites. Not family friends. They entered quietly and remained near the edges of the room. Observing. Waiting. One by one. Maury continued arriving. The hotel manager checked his watch. Then checked the entrance again. His anxiety visibly increased. Something was happening. Something important. Earlier that evening, he had received instructions from senior management regarding certain arrivals. The instructions had been unusually specific. Treat them with the highest priority. Ensure complete privacy. Notify immediately upon arrival. At the time, he hadn't understood why. Now he was beginning to suspect. And the realization made him nervous. Very nervous. Another black vehicle pulled into the hotel's private entrance outside. Then another. Then another. Security personnel quietly positioned themselves throughout the property. The movement was subtle enough to avoid attracting attention, but impossible to ignore once noticed. The manager wiped sweat from his forehead. Across the ballroom, an elderly businessman who had spent most of the evening observing Sophia suddenly sat upright. Recognition finally flashed across his face. He knew where he had seen her before. Not at social functions. Not in magazines. Not at charity events. In confidential, corporate reports. The realization hit him like a freight train. His eyes widened. Slowly, he looked around the room. Then toward Ethan. Then toward Vanessa. Then toward Ethan's laughing family. A look of disbelief spread across his face. "Oh no," he whispered. No one heard him. The ballroom remained filled with laughter and celebration. Yet beneath the surface, the atmosphere was changing. The air itself seemed heavier. The excitement felt forced, artificial, as though some invisible force had entered the room and quietly altered everything. Sophia noticed the businessman staring at her. Their eyes met briefly. The color immediately drained from his face. That reaction told her everything she needed to know. Someone had finally figured it out. And once one person knew, others soon would. Across the room, Ethan remained completely unaware. Still smiling. Still celebrating. Still convinced he was the hero of the evening. But outside the ballroom doors, more arrivals continued. The hotel manager received another message. His hands trembled as he read it. Then he looked toward Sophia. For the first time all night, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Because whatever was coming next was no longer approaching. It had arrived. And the tension spreading through the ballroom was about to explode into something nobody present would ever forget. The laughter was still echoing through the ballroom when the doors opened. At first, almost nobody noticed. The guests remained focused on Ethan and Vanessa. Champagne continued flowing. Music continued playing. Conversations filled the room. Then the first executive entered. He was followed by another. Then another. Then another. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Several guests recognized the faces. Not celebrities. Not politicians. Something far more influential. Corporate leaders. Board members. Investment executives. People whose decisions moved billions of dollars. The room gradually became quieter. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Even Ethan noticed. His smile faded slightly. He exchanged a confused glance with Vanessa. "What are they doing here?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged. He had no idea. Neither did anyone else. One by one, the executives entered the ballroom. None of them stopped to greet Ethan. None of them acknowledged Vanessa. Instead, they positioned themselves near the entrance as though waiting for someone. The hotel manager rushed forward immediately. His posture had completely changed. Gone was the confidence of a luxury hotel executive. In its place was visible nervousness. Respect. Almost fear. He checked his phone repeatedly. Then looked toward Sophia. Then back toward the entrance. The tension became impossible to ignore. Guests began whispering. Questions spread throughout the room. Who were they waiting for? Why had so many powerful people arrived at once? What was happening? Across the ballroom, Ethan's mother attempted to dismiss the growing curiosity. They must be here for another event. Her voice sounded far less confident than before. No one responded. Because deep down, everyone knew that explanation didn't make sense. The executives weren't acting like guests. They were acting like people preparing for someone's arrival. Vanessa tightened her grip on Ethan's arm. Something about the situation made her uncomfortable. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. Meanwhile, Sophia remained seated, calm, silent, watching. Then another black luxury vehicle arrived outside. And another. And another. The ballroom doors opened once more. Several security personnel entered. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Professionally. The kind of security normally reserved for heads of state or corporate titans. The music gradually stopped. No one had instructed the orchestra to stop playing. The musicians simply sensed the change in atmosphere. Soon, the entire ballroom had fallen silent. A silence so complete that even the sound of footsteps seemed loud. Then it happened. Sophia slowly stood. Every eye in the room turned toward her. The movement appeared ordinary. Yet somehow it commanded attention. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked. Sophia didn't answer. Vanessa laughed softly. "Oh, please." Several guests chuckled. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me you're planning to make a speech." Maury laughter followed. Ethan's mother smirked. "This isn't the time to embarrass yourself even further." The cruelty drew a few nervous laughs from nearby relatives. Vanessa stepped forward. For the first time all evening, she addressed Sophia directly. "You should just leave." Her voice carried across the ballroom. "You've already made things awkward enough." The insult hung in the air. Sophia simply looked at her. Not angrily. Not sadly. Calmly. The look unsettled Vanessa more than she expected. Because it wasn't the expression of a defeated woman. It was the expression of someone who already knew the outcome. Then the executives began moving. One by one. Toward Sophia. The ballroom collectively held its breath. Nobody understood what they were seeing. The lead executive stopped directly in front of her. A man whose face regularly appeared on business magazine covers. A man powerful enough to make CEOs nervous. And then he did something that shocked everyone. He lowered his head respectfully. "Good evening, Chairwoman." The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. For several seconds, silence completely consumed the ballroom. Ethan blinked, certain he had heard incorrectly. Vanessa stared, confused. The executive continued. "We apologize for the delay, Chairwoman Sophia." Another executive stepped forward. Then another. Then another. Each greeting her with the same respect. The same deference. The same unmistakable recognition. Around the ballroom, confusion rapidly turned into disbelief. Chairwoman Sophia, the pregnant woman they had spent the evening mocking. The woman they believed had lost everything. Ethan laughed nervously. There must be some mistake. No one joined him. Because the executives weren't behaving like people who had made a mistake. They were behaving like employees greeting their leader. The lead executive turned toward the crowd. His expression remained professional. "Allow me to formally introduce the majority owner and chairwoman of Blackstone Global Holdings." Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. The name hit like an explosion. Everyone knew Blackstone Global Holdings. Everyone. It was one of the largest private corporations in the country. Its influence stretched across real estate, technology, finance, logistics, and manufacturing. Its annual revenue exceeded billions. And according to the executive standing before them, Sophia owned it. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Faces turned pale. Champagne glasses lowered. Several guests physically stepped backward. Ethan stared at Sophia, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. No. The word escaped his lips automatically. No, that's impossible. The executive calmly continued. Miss Sophia inherited controlling ownership several years ago and has personally overseen the company's expansion. Another executive handed Sophia a folder. The room watched in stunned silence. Then came the final blow. The lead executive looked directly at Ethan. His expression never changed. Incidentally, several of Mr. Ethan Carter's largest contracts operate through subsidiaries owned by Blackstone Global Holdings. Ethan's face lost all color. The realization hit instantly. His company, his investors, his supply chain agreements, his expansion projects. Many were connected to Blackstone, connected to Sophia, connected to the woman he had just publicly humiliated, connected to the wife he had divorced less than an hour ago. Vanessa slowly released Ethan's arm. His mother looked as though she might collapse. His father couldn't speak. Around the ballroom, guests stared in absolute disbelief. Every insult, every laugh, every cruel remark suddenly replayed in their minds. Only now the meaning had changed. The woman they thought was powerless had been the most powerful person in the room all along. Sophia accepted the folder. Then she calmly looked around the ballroom. At Ethan, at Vanessa, at the family that had mocked her, at the guests who had laughed. Not a single word left her lips. She didn't need to speak. The silence said everything. And for the first time that night, nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The ballroom stood frozen in complete and utter shock. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then the ballroom erupted. Not with applause, not with laughter, with shock. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Guests stared at Sophia as though they were seeing her for the first time. Because in many ways they were. The pregnant woman they had spent the evening pitying, mocking, and dismissing had suddenly become the most important person in the room. And everyone knew it. Ethan stood frozen. His mind struggled to process the revelation. Blackstone Global Holdings. The name echoed inside his head. Again and again. His company had worked with Blackstone subsidiaries for years. Several of his largest projects depended on contracts connected to them. His upcoming expansion relied on partnerships tied to their logistics division. His investors frequently referenced Blackstone's support when evaluating future opportunities. The realization felt like a punch to the chest. Slowly, he looked at Sophia, then at the executives surrounding her, then back at Sophia. The pieces finally began fitting together, and the picture terrified him. No, he whispered. The lead executive opened the folder Sophia had been given. Inside were several documents. He reviewed them briefly before speaking. Chairwoman, your instructions have already been implemented. The room grew quiet again. Sophia nodded. Nothing more. The executive turned another page. All pending partnership renewals connected to Carter Technologies have been suspended. Ethan's eyes widened. What? The word escaped before he could stop it. The executive continued calmly. Several contracts have already been terminated. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Guests exchanged alarmed glances. The implications were enormous. Those weren't ordinary contracts. They were the foundation of Ethan's business growth, the foundation of his future. And they were disappearing. In real time. Right in front of him. His phone suddenly vibrated. Then again. And again. Ethan looked down. Missed calls. Emails. Urgent notifications. A cold knot formed in his stomach. With trembling fingers, he opened the first message. His largest supplier. Partnership suspended pending review. The second message. An investor requesting an emergency meeting. The third. Another contract termination. Then another. Then another. Each notification felt like another brick falling from a collapsing building. Nearby, Ethan's father grabbed his own phone. His expression quickly shifted from confusion to panic. Ethan! His voice cracked. Ethan, you need to look at this. Ethan barely heard him. Because more notifications were arriving. Faster now. Relentless. Across the ballroom, several businessmen quietly stepped away from Ethan. Only minutes earlier, they had been congratulating him. Now they suddenly found other conversations more important. Other people more valuable. Sophia noticed. Her grandfather had been right. People gather around success, but they flee from failure. Vanessa noticed it too. The shift was immediate. Brutal. One moment, she had been the center of attention. The next, people were avoiding eye contact. The women who had surrounded her earlier now drifted away. Their smiles vanished. Their enthusiasm evaporated. Because Vanessa's appeal had always been tied to Ethan's rising status. And Ethan's status was collapsing by the minute. For the first time all evening, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. This is ridiculous, she said. No one responded. The room had stopped listening to her. A prominent investor who had been speaking with Vanessa only moments earlier walked directly past her and approached Sophia instead. Chairwoman Sophia, he said respectfully. Congratulations on your continued success. Vanessa stared in disbelief. The investor didn't even acknowledge her existence. The humiliation hit harder than she expected. Because it revealed a painful truth. The social status she valued so highly had never been permanent. It had always depended on perception. And perception had changed. Instantly. Across the ballroom, Ethan's mother looked close to panic. This can't be happening. Her voice shook. There must be some misunderstanding. No one answered. Because there was no misunderstanding. Only consequences. For years, she had mocked Sophia. Belittled her. Treated her like an inconvenience. Now she realized she had spent years insulting a woman whose wealth exceeded her entire family's combined assets. The realization was devastating. Nearby relatives exchanged frightened looks. Several quietly slipped toward the exits. Others avoided Sophia's gaze entirely. No one wanted to be associated with the cruelty they had displayed earlier. Not anymore. The guests who had laughed the loudest suddenly became the quietest. The guests who had mocked Sophia most aggressively suddenly found themselves staring at the floor. The atmosphere had completely reversed. Hours earlier, everyone wanted Ethan's attention. Now everyone wanted Sophia's. The transformation was almost surreal. A phone rang. Then another. Then another. All across the ballroom. Executives. Investors. Business owners. Many were receiving the same news. Blackstone's position was clear. Its chairwoman had been publicly humiliated, and people were reacting accordingly. Some out of loyalty, others out of self-preservation. Either way, the result was the same. Ethan's empire was beginning to crumble. Piece by piece. The lead executive checked another message, then looked toward Sophia. Several financial institutions have also suspended active negotiations with Carter Technologies. The room collectively gasped. Banks. Now even the banks were pulling away. Ethan felt dizzy. Those negotiations represented millions. Future financing, expansion capital, growth opportunities. Without them, his company's future became uncertain. Very uncertain. Sophia remained calm. She hadn't ordered revenge. She hadn't demanded destruction. She had simply revealed the truth. The rest was happening naturally. People were making their own decisions. And those decisions were devastating Ethan's world. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm. You have to do something. For the first time, her confidence had completely vanished. Ethan looked at her, then slowly pulled his arm away. The gesture was small, but Vanessa felt it immediately. A crack had appeared, the same way cracks had appeared throughout everything else tonight. Her stomach tightened, because deep down she understood something. The man who abandoned his wife for another woman could abandon that woman too. The realization terrified her. Across the room, Sophia prepared to leave. One of the executives brought her coat. Another escorted her carefully. The room parted automatically as she moved. People who had mocked her earlier now stepped aside respectfully. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Nobody dared. Ethan watched her walking toward the exit. Panic finally overcame pride. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring everyone around him, ignoring Vanessa calling his name, ignoring his family's frantic questions. Sophia. His voice echoed through the ballroom. She stopped, slowly turned. The room held its breath. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time all evening, he looked exactly like the person who had lost everything. Please, he said quietly. Can we talk, just the two of us? And for the first time that night, genuine desperation appeared in his eyes. The ballroom stood silent. Hundreds of eyes moved between Ethan and Sophia. No one wanted to miss what happened next. Only minutes earlier, Ethan had stood at the center of the room as the victor. Now he looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. Please, he repeated. Can we talk, just the two of us? Sophia studied him quietly. For a moment, she saw the man she had once loved. The man she had supported. The man she had believed in. But the image lasted only a second. Because that man no longer existed. Or perhaps he never had. The years had stripped away every illusion. Slowly, Sophia nodded. The executives stepped back, giving them space. The room remained completely silent. Ethan took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. Weak. Desperate. Not the confident voice that had filled the ballroom earlier. The voice of a man who finally understood what he had lost. I'm so sorry, Sophia. His eyes filled with regret. I made a terrible mistake. Sophia said nothing. Ethan continued. I wasn't thinking clearly. The statement sounded hollow even to him. Because deep down, he knew exactly what he had been thinking. He had wanted Vanessa. He had wanted admiration. He had wanted excitement. Most of all, he had wanted what he believed was an upgrade. Now he stood face to face with the consequences. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "But if there's any chance..." His voice trailed off. The hope in his eyes was almost painful to watch. Sophia looked at him calmly. Then she glanced toward Vanessa. The woman who had once been her best friend stood alone. Completely alone. No crowd surrounded her anymore. No admirers. No supporters. The people who had celebrated her victory had quietly disappeared. Even Ethan was no longer standing beside her. Vanessa looked frightened. Lost. For the first time all evening, she understood exactly what she had sacrificed. Not just a friendship. Not just her reputation. Everything. Sophia returned her attention to Ethan. "You think this is about money?" Ethan blinked. "What? You think I am angry because of business?" Her voice remained steady. Calm. Controlled. "I'm not." The ballroom remained silent as everyone listened. Sophia continued. "The money doesn't matter." Ethan looked confused. "The company doesn't matter." Her hand moved gently to her stomach. "This is what matters." For the first time, tears appeared in her eyes. Not tears of weakness. Tears of truth. "I trusted you." The words struck harder than any accusation. "I trusted both of you." She glanced briefly toward Vanessa. Then back to Ethan. "You weren't strangers." Her voice cracked slightly. "You were the two people I loved most." Ethan lowered his head. Shame flooded through him. Because he finally understood. The betrayal had never been about the affair itself. It had been about trust. The one thing that could never be replaced. "I can rebuild a company if it fails," Sophia said. "I can earn money. I can create new opportunities." She paused. But once trust is destroyed, it never returns the same way. The truth settled heavily over the ballroom. No one could argue with it. No one could deny it. Sophia wiped a tear from her cheek. "For months I kept asking myself what I did wrong." Ethan's heart sank. She smiled sadly. "Eventually, I realized the answer." The room remained motionless. "I didn't do anything wrong." The words carried enormous power. Because they were true. She had been loyal, faithful, supportive. The failure of the marriage wasn't hers to carry. And she no longer intended to. Ethan took a step forward. "Sophia." "No." The single word stopped him instantly. Not angry. Not loud. Final. Absolute. She looked directly into his eyes. "The marriage ended long before tonight." Another painful truth. The moment you chose betrayal. Ethan felt something inside him break. Because he knew she was right. There was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to defend. Nothing left to save. The future he suddenly wanted back no longer existed. Vanessa quietly turned away. Tears streamed down her face. Nobody stopped her as she walked toward the exit. Nobody followed. Nobody cared. She had spent years chasing someone else's happiness. And in the end, she lost her own. Across the ballroom, Ethan's family stood in stunned silence. The same people who had laughed at Sophia hours earlier now looked completely defeated. Their arrogance had vanished. Their certainty had vanished. They finally understood the cost of judging someone they never truly knew. Some lessons arrived too late. This was one of them. Sophia adjusted her coat. One of the executives stepped forward to assist her. Another opened the ballroom doors. The gesture wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It was respect. Genuine respect. The kind no amount of money can buy. Sophia took one final look around the room. At Ethan. At his family. At the guests who had mocked her. At the people who had celebrated her humiliation. Then she smiled. Not because she had won. Because she was free. Free from lies. Free from betrayal. Free from the weight she had carried for far too long. And most importantly, free to build a future for herself and her child. A future untouched by the mistakes of the past. As she walked toward the exit, the executives followed. The crowd automatically stepped aside. The same crowd that had ridiculed her now watched with admiration. With respect. With awe. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one dared. Outside, the cool night air greeted her. The storm clouds that had gathered earlier were beginning to break apart. For the first time all evening, moonlight appeared above the city. Sophia paused beside the waiting vehicle. Her hand rested gently on her stomach. A small smile touched her lips. A new chapter was beginning. Not because she owned a multi-billion-dollar company. Not because she had power. Not because she had wealth. But because she had finally chosen herself. As the vehicle pulled away, the lights of the city stretched endlessly before her. And behind her, inside a ballroom filled with regret, stood people who had mistaken kindness for weakness and silence for powerlessness. They had learned the truth too late. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need applause. True power waits quietly. And when the moment arrives, it speaks for itself.